Welcome to Webster Through the Years Museum. Our museum was begun back in 1976 as a bicentennial project. Our bicentennial committee was headed by Ben Forsythe and Clyde Mellinger. The end result for Webster was this museum. I carry this apple with me because this is a symbol of our history, a symbol of our growth, and a symbol of Webster as it appears today. Please step back in time with me, back to 1881 to 1900. I'm dressed as a citizen may have been dressed 80 to 100 years ago. Our museum, when it opened in 1976, was dedicated to Esther Dunn, former town historian. It was the title, Webster Through the Years, came from her book, A Superb History of the Village and Town of Webster. We'll go over now and look at some of the early quilts. The first quilt that I wanted to show you is probably the most typical of the early quilts that we have here in the museum. It's what they call the log cabin quilt. If you look carefully, you will see a symbol, a sign that resembles the logs in a log cabin. In the center of each square has a red section indicating warmth of the hearth and the fireplace. This patchwork quilt is a typical example of the kind of quilts that we have here in the museum. This one was made by Jenny Lapham, or at least we know this portion of it was. Jenny was an artist, and the only example that we have of her artwork is in this quilt. This next quilt over here came from the Little Bay Road School. One of the first parent-teacher organizations in the whole country actually started here in Webster on Bay Road. The Patrons Association, as they called themselves, made this quilt to raise money to buy equipment for the school. Various individuals in the school signed their name on here, did the sewing. If you look up carefully, there's Scheck, there's Shoemaker, and other Webster names. And as we go along, we see some other quilts that were, again, made here in Webster. This one goes back to the Victorian period. Each stitch, if you look carefully, is different from the one before. Our next quilt over here is what we call a signature quilt. And there's some old Webster names again on here. There's Kate, there's Shoemaker again. When we got some of these signature quilts, it was a little difficult to determine what church they came from, because normally they were done by the church people. But as we researched the names, we found Catholics, we found Protestants, we found Methodists, Lutherans. But again, we did discover they did have one thing in common. They were all German. So it sometimes took a little time to trace back as to who really made these quilts. Now, under the quilts, of course, we have some other, perhaps a little more modern quilts. This is a Quaker-type quilt that was given to the museum. This quilt here is really not a quilt yet. It is merely a coverlet, or the top, rather, to a quilt. The backing still needs to be done. Perhaps somebody someday will volunteer to repair that and fix it for us. This one over here underneath, take this down, we have another school quilt. This quilt here was made by the children, boys and girls, at Plank Road School, Plank Road North, before it quit. But this is what our museum is. It's not just what we had in the past, but it's what is here today. And we're here to learn the past as well as the present. Now, if we could move over here to this section of the museum. Not everything in this museum is 80 years old, and that includes the director. One of the newer things we have here is a Xerox machine. It's in 3 units, but it's actually one machine. Now, the nice part of this old machine is that it still operates, but I can show you how a new Xerox machine operates by demonstrating on this older model. Now, this one's about 25, 30 years old. Now, we, of course, have to start with an original. Of course, in all the machines, new or old, we have to lift up the door, place the original on the glass plate, and then of course your newer ones, you push the button and out comes your copy. But on this machine, it's going to take us a little bit longer. The first thing we do is to check our plate. Now all the machines have a plate. Now this one is flat because all the earlier ones were. Later on, they were made into a drum, and of course once they made the drum, they were able to operate much faster. Now the first thing that happens inside the Xerox machine is that this plate or drum, whichever you have, becomes plated with static electricity. Now static electricity works a little bit like a magnet. Things will stick to it. But the one thing that will help it to lose its static electrical charge is light. So we put a black plate over it, then we move it from that machine or that unit over to what we call the camera unit. Now inside the camera unit there are mirrors and some lights. Now the light will bounce off the map back onto the plate. Now wherever there were black lines on the map, theoretically the light did not get back and lose its charge on the plate. Now we open up our machine, another portion of it, and inside this portion is where we keep the toner. Now the toner is really the secret of the thing that makes xerography work. Or as you get a dirty finger, you have to try to keep your fingers clean. Now we invert the plate, lock it in here very carefully, and pull out the black slide. And we're trying to seal everything in here, the darkness as well as the black toner. Now we will tumble it back and forth several times. If you listen carefully, you probably could hear the toner as it slid back and forth across the plate. And here we have our finished product. They're almost finished. We do have a copy of the map, but of course it's like a negative. Everything is in reverse. Besides, we don't want our map on this plate. We want it on a piece of paper. So we hope that we can retrieve some paper from inside the machine. We place the paper now on top of this plate, return the plate with the paper back into the machine, and again charge the machine. Now this time we're charging not the plate, but the paper, which is on top. And besides, this is where we want our image to appear. As you'll notice, I'm going to have difficulty getting the paper off the plate because of the static electricity that's holding it to the plate. As we lift it off, we see that we do have a copy of the original. But we're not through with our process yet because this toner, as I said, is held onto the paper only through the process of static electricity. In order to make it become permanent, we put the paper into what we call the fuser. Now the fuser is hot. It's as hot as your electric toaster at home. Now we have to leave that there about 8 seconds. Now while that is fusing, we can get ready for our next copy. And of course the first thing we have to do is to clean off our plate, put it back into the machine, and as you remember, our first step is to charge the plate. About that time, our copy should be ready. As I said, it is hot, a little difficult to hang on to for a few seconds. But now we end up with a copy which is identical to the original. The only difference is the time. It takes me about 3 minutes to make one copy if I don't stop to talk, where your newer copiers make 2 or 3 in a second printed on both sides. We call this our communications corner because we have other methods, older methods of communicating that go way back into Webster's history. About the oldest thing that we have here in this corner is this telephone. Now, it doesn't look much like a telephone, but it does have a bell, so therefore maybe you would recognize it. This bell was in the Webster Post Office, which used to be located up on Main Street, East Main Street, where the Spokes and Wheels, a bicycle shop, is located today. Back in 1900, there were only 2 telephones, this one in the post office, and the other one just north of the post office, down by the railroad tracks, in the railroad station. Now, my land, here it is 9 o'clock, and there's no mail in. So I'll pretend that I'm the postman calling the railroad station. The first thing I do is tap the little button here in the center, and that would ring the bell down at the railroad station. Then I'd place my ear up here to what we might call the receiver. There's no problem as to who's calling, because there are only 2 phones in town. And he says, "What do you want?" "Is the mail in? It's 9 o'clock. He had to yell on these things. And he yelled back, and I could barely hear him, "Yes, it will be in about an hour," and he will send it up. So that's the story of Webster's first post office. Now, another method of communicating with the outside world, from Webster to the rest of the world, of course, was through the radio. Now, here we have an example of one of the early radios. Now, they all came complete with earphones. Again, you really needed the earphones because you had to, first of all, stay near the radio at all times, because to eliminate the static and then to keep your music or the voice clear, you had to constantly change these dials. It wasn't until well after 1900, around 1905, before the speaker came in. Of course, the advantage of the speaker when it arrived was that the whole family could watch at the same time. Now, then we come back to a more recent time, back to 1940, when Webster got its first television. Mr. Hune, Oscar Hune, was the first television dealer and the first man in town to own a television. He didn't get to see it very much because he could only get 1 station out of Buffalo. There were no local stations, and it was only for a half hour once a week when they broadcast the horse races from Hamburg. Okay. Along with communications, of course, it was important that we be able to see the television, or see to read the newspaper or the magazines that we had. And of course, if you needed glasses back in the turn of the century or before, you didn't go to an eye doctor, an optometrist. You went to a store like the Village Shop, and you would ask the proprietor in there to let you look at his eyeglasses, and he would show you his whole case. And what you would do when you went in there, you would proceed to try on every pair that he had. Of course, some of the glasses looked like they were designed for children because they had such short bows. But each pair of glasses was designed for children and adults. And of course, by extending the bows, an adult could wear the same pair of glasses that a child could. Now, you'll say the lenses are awfully small. Well, they were, because if they tried to make a large lens like we have in our glasses today, you'd find many, many imperfections in there, and you'd have more difficulty seeing than you do without any glasses. Of course, if you had a little bit more money, you might prefer this type of glass, which would hang onto your nose. But again, these were handy for the people who didn't need glasses all the time. If they just needed them while they were reading, they were fine, because when they were through reading, they could hang them here on their pin and go about their daily task. I know when I got my own glasses, which I can see with as well as my regular glasses, it took me quite a while. I've probably tried on 50 or 60 pair at different antique shops before I was able to find these. Now, you want to join me, and we'll go on to another part of the museum and another part of Webster's history. We're going to the basement of the candy kitchen that used to be on Main Street in Webster. Now, in the basement, we'd find the kettle where Mr. Papanaw used to make the chocolate, to make the chocolate ice cream bunnies and rabbits and some other things that we're going to see in just a minute. Here are some of the tools that he used to stir the chocolate, make sure it didn't burn. And of course, he always had a thermometer just to make sure that it didn't get too hot. Now, just follow me as we go upstairs to the candy kitchen. We'll see if I can't perhaps serve you something, or at least offer you something. Here we have a menu that goes back a number of years, and if you get a chance, a little later on, look at the prices. They certainly aren't today's prices. In our candy kitchen, we have quite a few of the artifacts that were left after the fire about 10 or 12 years ago. We actually have some chocolate that was made by Mr. Papanaw in a mold. Now, we do have a few of the molds here. One of them is a rabbit that was used at Easter time. Now, what they would do from the kettle that you saw a few moments ago, they would pour in the hot chocolate in the bottom of the mold. Now, sometimes if you wanted a solid rabbit, of course, they'd let the chocolate remain in there. If it was to be a hollow rabbit, they'd pour the chocolate in, shake it around, and then pour the excess back into the kettle. once the rabbit was done, that is, the chocolate had hardened, of course, the form would be taken apart, and you would then find inside your completed rabbit. Of course, that was for Easter time. Now, when it came Christmas time, of course, that was a time when we had the ribbon candy. Now, Mr. Papineau used to make the ribbon candy by hand, but a little later on, he did make this machine which he used to make the ribbon candy. The candy was mixed up in a bowl into a hard lump like dough. It was run through this machine here, and of course then would come down this channel, and as it came down, of course, it would have this peculiar shape which was formed by turning of this wheel. Then after it got down in here by hands, then they would be squeezed together. Now maybe I could make you a sundae or something else. Have a stool and you're all ready. All right, now maybe you'd like to join me over in our parlor. That's going back a good many years when we go over there. Welcome to our parlor. Our parlor features Abraham Lincoln, mainly because it sets the period of time for the parlor, which is about 1860 to 1870. We are especially proud here in our museum that we have a rare item, an Abraham Lincoln letter. This letter was written by Abraham Lincoln to a Reverend Whitcomb. Now, Reverend Whitcomb never lived in Webster, but his ancestors eventually came to Webster to settle. In fact, some of them are still here today. Back at this period of time, of course, we had no television, we had no radio, so the music, the entertainment had to be provided by members of the family. Or if the family couldn't play, people still might have had an organ, or if they had a little bit more money, perhaps a piano. But again, these instruments that we have in the museum do work. There was no electricity back in those days, so I'm going to have to sit here and pump. I'm no organist and I'm no pianist, but I will try to make a little sound on the organ for you. Our museum is unique here in Webster because it's strictly a Webster museum. We don't have artifacts from all over the world, not even all over the country. Part of this uniqueness is that we have mementos from the families that founded and settled this community in the early 1800s. Here we have Mr. Phillips' portrait, who was a farmer down on Phillips Road, down where Xerox manufacturing facility is today. We also have John Clem's picture. Of course, most of you know Clem Road and the Clem Road schools. The Clems were a German family that migrated to this country and settled here in Webster. But again, another farmer who plays a very important role in the history of our town. Our most prominent citizen that was born, brought up in Webster is Dr. Holt. Dr. L. Emmett Holt was born down on Holt Road, where Sweets Farms Party House is located now. He attended the little one-room school down there at the corner of Holt and Clem. What made Dr. Holt famous? Well, first of all, he was an educator. He taught other doctors how to take care, how to treat children. Up until the time that Dr. Holt practiced medicine, many doctors would not treat children only because they simply did not know how. Dr. Holt wrote a book, The Disease of Infancy and Childhood. He wrote many editions of these. It was revised every 2 or 3 years. He also wrote a book on the care and feeding of children. He was a Dr. Spock, we might say, of the last century, although Dr. Holt knew enough to stay out of politics. But he's certainly dearly beloved here in our little community. This here desk is the George Curtis Memorial Desk. This was used by George, his father, and his grandfather before him. So it had a great deal of use over the years. Now over here on this side, We also have another musical instrument, a square piano. It still plays. The square piano was designed as a thing of beauty for furniture-wise. It was not especially a beautiful instrument to play. And we haven't forgotten the women. Yes, the men were important to the town, but so were the women. And certainly one of the persons most remembered and revered in Webster is Miss Knight. She was a school teacher that lived all her life here in the town. And to memorialize Miss Knight, we also have the Miss Knight doll. This is really a Shirley Temple doll, but every town can have a Shirley Temple doll, but only Webster can have a Miss Knight doll. Miss Knight decorated this doll back in 1940 when Webster celebrated its centennial. This gown, this dress that she's wearing, was made from Miss Knight's graduation gown, and the hair she styled after her hairstyle when she was a teenager. So we would rather have Miss Knight than Shirley Temple. It's true that as time went on, Webster made progress. We didn't stay back in the 1800s. At the turn of the century, why we joined the rest of the world and the rest of the country. And we imported an early record player, the Victrola. Of course, we know it was made by Thomas Edison. The records, even in those days, they were round, they had a small hole in the center and tiny grooves. The sound, yes, the sounds have changed also. Myself, I like the old sounds. You can have your rock and roll, but I'll take this sound any day in preference to what you have to offer. Even the parents in the turn of the century said, turn it down. So we do have a method of turning it down. Now, I hope some of you agree that my music is better than your music. When it was time for the children to go to bed at night, and it is getting a little late, the mother, father would take one of the candles off the wall and hand it to the child and say, here, take this to your bedroom. And with a lit candle, the child would then proceed up the dark stairway to his bedroom. Welcome to our bedroom. Now, the bedroom goes back to about 1820. This is probably the oldest room in the museum. Now, before I start the tour, I'll hang up my light, and oh, somebody didn't make the bed. You know, the room does look a little crowded, but again, the whole family oftentimes would have to sleep in one room. Now, our bed is made with wooden springs. Now, this actually made it very soft because of the ticking, not a mattress, but the ticking that goes on top. Now, the ticking was filled with feathers, goose down, and the smaller feathers from the chickens. There were a fleece sheet instead of the shiny sheet that most of us are used to sleeping on, and of course no blankets, but we had quilts. Now, this quilt was made from pieces from other quilts. This design was similar to the one that you saw earlier in the tour. But Mother never wasted anything. She saved the pieces of the quilt and then made a new quilt out of it. Last but not least, we put on the spread. Now, it's not called a bedspread, it was called a coverlet. Now, these coverlets, of course, were hand done on looms, and usually they had a date on them. You notice that the predominant color here on this particular side of the coverlet is blue, but if we tip it the other way, the predominant color is white. Oftentimes, in the wintertime, they would make up the bed with the dark side of the coverlet up. In the summertime, the white side would be up. This was always in the bedroom too, along with the children, but this had nothing to do with the children. This was strictly to smooth out the bed and get out the wrinkles. Now we're ready for company. But let's look at our other bed. Underneath the main bed was what they called the trundle bed. During the day, it could be pushed out of the way under the main bed, and in the evening would be pulled out for the children to sleep in. Makes a noise. In here, we do not have the nice wooden spring, but we have rope springs. And our mattress is not only noisy, but that's, again, a ticking, and that was filled, well, let me show you, corn husks. Now, there was a very practical reason for putting the corn husks in here for the children, because the little 2- and 3-year-olds would sleep in this bed, and occasionally, in the middle of the night, or the nap time, they might have an accident. Well, if they had an accident, all Mother would have to do is empty out the ticking, throw out the wet corn husk, wash the ticking, fill it full of fresh corn husk, and all ready then for the next nap. The babies, the wee babies, slept in the rocking cradle over here where we have a doll, and oftentimes it was a children's chore, the older children's chore, to rock the baby. While we're down here, we might look at what we have hidden under the bed. We have a couple of chamber pots. Now, these were necessary pots, or call them whatever you wanted to. You have to remember that back in the 1800s, there were no bathrooms in the houses, so they had to use the chamber pots in the cold weather and at night. Now, when it got time for Mother, oh, one more thing. The bedrooms often had no heat. So in order to warm the beds before the children or before the family got in, they would use a bed warmer. They would fill this with hot coals, then run it in between the sheets and warm up the bed before anyone got in them. You had to be careful, though, not to burn the sheets or the blankets. Now, when Mother then was ready to get dressed in the morning, here we have her in her slip, but it wasn't just a case of the slip and then the rest of the clothes going on over it. She might want to add to her figure by putting her bustle on the posterior. Then, of course, her dress would go over the top of that. Or if she was going to a more fashionable affair, perhaps she would want to put on her hoop. Now, this particular hoop, of course, is much too small for the lady. This was a little girl's hoop, and the purpose of this would be to hold out the skirt so it would look as though she had on lots of petticoats, where in essence she only had one or two. Now, there are some other tools here in our bedroom that we might want to look at. If you look closely at the floor, that you'll notice that our carpet is in several sections. These were again woven on a loom about 3 feet wide, and they're all tacked down. Of course, it had no vacuum cleaner, so once a year the carpet would have to be taken out, and beaten with a carpet beater. Then after it was beaten, Mother and Father, it always took 2 people to do it. Father would usually operate the carpet stretcher, put this end in along the molding, along the floor, and then by using a jack action would tighten the carpet, and then Mother would go along and replace the tacks. Now, before we leave our bedroom, I'd like you to meet Mr. and Mrs. Priest up here on the wall. They weren't famous, no roads were ever named after them or anything else. They were farm people up in the West Webster section, but they were famous in the sense that he is our pickle king, the pickle king of Webster. For many, many years, Mr. Priest raised more pickles than any other farmer in the town. So as he brought them into the pickle factory, which incidentally is down where the Loose Caboose restaurant is now, they called him the Pickle King because of the quantity of pickles that he brought in year after year. Now, over in the far wall, you'll notice 2 children pictures. These were quite common, quite typical of what you would find in an early bedroom. The first one, the one on the right, is wide awake. The one on the left, sound asleep. So as the children sleep, I'll get ready and we'll go over and have breakfast ready in the kitchen. Good morning. It's time to get breakfast ready. It's not just a case of coming down in the morning, turning on the stove. It's a case of coming down, taking the lid off the stove, getting a match, and starting the fire. That is, if you remember to put the wood in on the night before. Once the stove gets hot, of course it won't take too long to get our breakfast. But in the very beginning, we'll have to start by taking the lid right out of the stove, and all our pots and pans are designed so they will fit down in where the lid belongs. Once the stove begins to warm up and we don't want quite as much heat, we'll put the lids back in and then we'll cook on top of the stove. Now when it comes to the waffle iron, of course the waffle iron will only cook one side at a time. But with this type of a stove, having the lid off, when we go to turn and cook the other side, it's no big job because it will flip over right inside the stove. Now, the other important thing that we need for breakfast is a coffee. Now, you don't just go and get the ground coffee. You go over to the coffee grinder, pour in the coffee beans, and then proceed to grind the coffee. Now, the reason for this, for grinding your own coffee, pour this right in here with the water, put that back on the stove, and let it heat up. But the reason for grinding your coffee in those days was that you had no vacuum pack. You had no way of having fresh coffee except to grind your own in the morning. Of course, we've got our eggs started here, we've got our waffles going, and we've got our coffee. That is getting warm now. But, of course, we also want some toast. But again, no electric toaster, so we use this contraption here. It'll very nicely hold 4 slices of bread. Since our waffles are about done, we can take this off and put the toast right on top. Ooh, that is hot. And do our toast over there. Now, while all this is cooking, Mother might start to get the youngsters' lunch ready. Of course, get out the lunch box. Now, you say, oh, that's much too small for a sandwich. Well, years ago, children wouldn't carry sandwiches to school because, again, one of the things they didn't have were baggies or wax paper and that sort of thing. So what Mother would do is to make some rolls the day before in the muffin tin, and she would slice the rolls, spread that with butter or peanut butter, jam, and you'd carry this kind of a lunch pail to school. Now, if it's still too small, then for the older children, perhaps they'd send this along. You remember, if you will, when we first came into the museum, that I had an apple. Now, the apple was, of course, as I said before, very important to the history of Webster. And this little machine here, well, in fact, back at the turn of the century, there were all kinds of little machines that were patented to help Mother do her chores. But this particular little machine, this apple peeler, had a very important role to play in the history of Webster. Now, I'll try to make this machine work, but as all machines are, they sometimes do not work. We do end up with a little mess, but here's what the machine does. It peeled the apple, cored it, and sliced it. Now, why is this important to Webster? They are good. Because for many, many years, Webster's chief import was a dried apple. Now, these were apples that were cored, peeled, and sliced. Then these dried apples were sent all over the world. Mother's chores still aren't over. There's some ironing to be done. And we'll try to get the wrinkles out of this napkin. Again, the irons were being heated at the back of the stove. And Mother, of course, would get her hot iron. Well, it's hot enough. Then a little bit of wax on the bottom so it won't stick, not too much. And then she'd proceed to iron her clothing. If she had to rest for a while and go do something else, she had a place to set the iron. Now, of course, that iron would eventually cool off. She'd take it back on the stove, put that section down, pick up a new one, and with the same handle, go back and finish her chores over here. Once the children were off to school, she still had other chores to do. She didn't go and buy her butter. She used her butter churn. I'll put that up here so perhaps you can see it a little bit better. Inside of this, she'd put the cream and proceed then to make the butter in this fashion. Now this took 20 to 30 minutes. We say mother did this, but oftentimes the children, this would be their chore once they got home. Now we had the old cupboards where things were stored. We had a whole drawer for the flour, another whole drawer where they'd store the sugar. And many of the tools weren't bought tools. They were made, hand-carved by the family, by father, grandfather, or an uncle during the winter months. Well, it's getting near time for to go to work at the basket factory, but before Mother goes, she still has her wash to do. So if you'll come with me, we'll, oh, wait a minute, I almost forgot. Better get, just a minute here, better get some things out of the oven. Yes, Mother made her bread. Yeah, the turkey's ready. And last but not least, better get this out of the stove. Yes, this is nothing to eat. This is what we're going to put in our carriage, because it is a little cold this morning, to keep our feet warm. This is a soapstone. You'd wrap this in a blanket or a small towel and put it in your buggy or sleigh. Or in the wintertime, you'd put it in the foot of your bed to keep your bed warm all evening. So now we'll go on and finish up the day by doing the wash. All right, one of Mother's hardest jobs, of course, came on wash day. And, of course, if Mother was sick and the kids were small, I suppose Father had to chip in and hopefully know how to operate the old washing machines. Of course, first of all, you take the dirty clothes, you put it in the water, and then you take the soap and you shave that off with a knife. Now, of course, the soap didn't come from the store. That had to be made by hand. Now, the children didn't help make the soap because of the lye. Remember the stove? There were ashes. We saved those ashes because that, again, went into the soap, making of the soap. We got that all soaked now, and we proceed then to use our washing machine. Say it's not much of a washing machine. Well, it sure did pound out the dirt. Now, of course, that was pretty primitive. And then around the turn of the century, when things got a little more modern, why, Father, having done this a few times, he would go and buy Mother, what? A new washing machine. If you look inside your own washing machine at home, you're going to see that the inside is very similar to this. But again, we do the same procedure. Throw the dirty clothes in the washing machine, and again, begin to plunge the clothes until they were dry. Now, some of your newer washing machines, you'll notice on your television ads, do this action. The old ones went this way, but they'll advertise the new ones as going up and down. Well, it's not the new ones that go up and down. The old ones went up and down. Then a few years later, of course, they came out with another type of washing machine, which really made it quite convenient for Mother. Father didn't mind doing the wash at all. Again, throw in the soap and the water and the dirty clothes, get it down in there. And of course, this would take a much bigger load than the other one. Get this thing going here. And of course, in no time, why, your clothes would be not only mangled, but clean. Open it up and get it out. Now, in order to get the water out of here, we'd have to run it through the wringer, because it is pretty damp. Watch the fingers now, and out it comes, practically drip dry. Well, I notice that there's still a little dirt, a little ring around the collar, so we have to go back here a little bit, back up. We still need our old wash tub here and the old scrub board, good old days before whisk. Get our soap. And we really go to work here on this scrub board, and this is bound to take the ring out from around the collar, and a little bit hard on the knuckles too. So we go on to work now. It's time Father got to the basket factory, I hear the whistle blowing. Welcome to the basket factory in Webster, the largest one in the world, or it was at one time. Again, the apple played an important role in the basket factory. In the very beginning, of course, as the farmers grew more and more apples and other vegetables, they needed baskets to pick their fruit in and to ship it to market. Some of the very earliest baskets were handmade ones made down in Basket Road, hence the name, Basket Road. But the farmers couldn't produce baskets nearly fast enough for the area farmers. So this is how the Kittleberger Basket Factory started in Webster. Whereas most of the baskets, similar to this market basket, were made for the farmers. But during the off-season, they had tried and worked out very successfully making other kinds of baskets, such as the Easter basket. Now, these Easter baskets had a much wider distribution than did some of the farmers' baskets. These Easter baskets were shipped over many parts of the United States and shipped out of Webster on the old Hojack Railroad. And they soon discovered that by stacking the baskets one inside the other, it was much cheaper to ship these baskets, say, to Chicago and Detroit and other cities, because 3 or 4 baskets would only take up the space of one. As time went on, of course, they went from a lot of handwork. In the beginning, of course, most of the baskets were made by hand, with a lot of hand labor, and most of them were made on a mold. As time went on, they did become more mechanized, and they did have machines which would make the baskets. They also went into other kinds of baskets, similar to this one. Most of you wouldn't identify it in its present state, but this was a purse, would be a lady's purse. This is the way they would appear as they left the factory. However, they'd sell them to places like Sibley's, who would buy them, paint them, decorate them with ribbons and bows, and then they would make quite a fancy lady's purse. They always had the reputation down at the basket factory that no matter what kind of basket you wanted, they had it. You wouldn't walk in for a basket and say, no, we don't have it. They always had the basket. This basket could be a baby's basket, or it could be a clothes basket. Now, this particular little job here, sometimes it's called a mushroom basket, a grape basket. You asked for the basket down there. They had a basket. One youngster asked me once, did they have one for an elephant? I don't think they ever made one quite that large. I hope you've enjoyed your trip here to the Webster Museum, that you'll come back again and see the rest of it. You've only seen a very, very small portion of the things that have been donated and loaned to our museum. Thank you for coming. We'll see you again soon, I hope.